Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.
We are here because for the first time for many years, British sovereign territory has been invaded by a foreign power.
The task force, with all its power, is ready. Britain has gathered its might. It must set its course. I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back. We're now between the two gun lines, and there's a right old artillery duel going on between them.
There is a white flag flying over Stanley. Very marvellous.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air, Stories from the Armed Forces. In this series, we hear untold stories from the Falklands War, 40 years on. This is the story of the conflict, told by 8 different people who were actually there.
So as part of this fantastic mini-series covering the 40th anniversary of the Falklands, Steve, you found a farmer to talk to from the Falkland Islands.
Well, when you say I think this is once again with the help of Chris Howe, very useful chap, has to be said. But yes, I've had the pleasure of talking to Carol, who is a Falkland Islander still, while she was on the Falklands, strangely enough.
Yeah, and she was there in 1982 when some unwelcome guests arrived on the 2nd of April, and she's going to tell you all about what that felt like at the time and what happened.
She is indeed. I think she starts out a little bit nervous in this chat, but she certainly gets into a stride. But this is a story worth listening to.
I can't wait.
So, Carol, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And when we agreed a time, I have to admit, I didn't realise that you would be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I don't think my world times really panned out very well there. But thank you nonetheless for agreeing to do it.
That's okay. It's a normal time for me to get up in the morning at the moment to go to work. So it's just that it's Saturday and not Monday to Friday.
Okay. Well, in that case, I feel slightly better. But again, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. So you are currently on the Falkland Islands. We probably ought to make that clear since I haven't said that.
Yes, I'm on the Falkland Islands. Good morning. At 6 o'clock in the morning.
And obviously this is home for you. So we're here to talk about the Falklands conflict or the Falklands War. I just wanted to get your story and what your experiences were because, you're a farmer, is that right? When the conflict started, or a farmer's wife, if that's appropriate to say?
Yes. We bought our farm in 1980, which was called Mount Kent Farm. Parents and I got married in 1969. We had 3 small children in 1982. It was quite frightening when the governor came on and said that the Argentines would be here by daylight the next morning. My first thought was I've only watched war films. So are they going to come in with machine guns and machine gun us all down? So I asked the children, did they all want to spend the night in the spare double bed? They asked what for, and I said, as a treat. I didn't want to frighten them.
Yeah.
And we just stayed awake all night, waiting for news and what might happen. But of course, everything happened in Stanley and not out on the farms. So it was quite worrying for us as well because most of our family was in Stanley. And we didn't want to bother phoning all the time to see how people were. Once it quietened down in Stanley, I did phone and my father answered and I said, was everyone okay? And he said, yes, fine, apart from one of my nieces that was so terrified she was under the kitchen table. And each time that they coaxed her to come out, another bang would go off. So she spent most of the day under the kitchen table. So he said when things were allowed to move would Terence come into Stanley and get my sister and 2 children and take them out of it because she was so terrified.
Mm.
So we ended up with, I think it was 13 or 14 people sleeping in our house for the 2.5 months, trying to get people out of Stanley and families. And some days in my diary, I was feeding up to 20 odd people as they were fleeing Stanley to other farms, get away from it.
Mm. So it's probably, I mean, this was quite a long time ago. It's 40 years ago, as you know, and I think it's important for people to understand that we obviously didn't have the kind of technology then. Nobody did that that we've all got now. So communication and knowing what was going on must have been really difficult.
The only thing how we knew what was going on was listening to our radio, to the Patrick Watts and the governor coming on with bits and pieces, and people in Stanley when they were fighting through the town. People would phone up and say they were laying on the floor and there were bullets going through the house and things like that. So we just had to sit back and listen to it and just thinking how terrified they must be. And we weren't there to help them.
Mm. So as the Argentine invasion progressed, what happened? Was it just you looking after more and more people? And what news did you have? Did you have any idea what the British government was going to do?
Not. For the first day, it was quite frightening because the news from Britain kept saying that they thought the Argentines had invaded. And that was very worrying to know that, please someone tell them, come and help us. I think it was more afraid that we had nowhere to go. People can go over the border, they can flee, but we couldn't flee anywhere. We were here and that was it. And that time, you could only go to Britain and stay if your grandfather was born in the UK.
Right.
I had a grandfather that was born in the UK, both of mine were, but my husband had nothing. So we couldn't leave. I'm sure that at that time, if we wanted to go, we could have went, but it was our home, our farm, our livelihood. We knew nothing else. It was our home.
Mm. So why should you have to leave, really? I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yes, it is the point. But I don't know. I think that as I get older, I keep thinking that what I know now, I know it's a silly thing to say, but I think I'd have rather them taken me off the island than have so many British lose their lives for our sake.
Mm.
Mm.
So before we get on to that, because I think that's a really important point, of course. So at the obviously the invasion's happened. You don't really know what's going on in terms of the British government. When did you find out something was going to be done, and what was it like up till that point?
They announced over the weekend, Friday the 2nd of April, as I say, it was a Friday. And over the weekend, they announced from Britain that they were sending a task force. But at that time, it seemed a long way away from us to you.
Yeah.
And how long was it going to take? Perhaps we would all be dead by the time they got here.
Mm.
Perhaps I did watch too many war films. I don't know. But it was so terrifying that they might come in and take our kids away. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was more afraid of the unknown.
Yeah, of course.
And I just couldn't wait when they said the British were coming. My first words on a Sunday, 2 days later, was they had put a BBC programme over called Calling the Falklands, and they asked people from UK families to speak to us. And, well, I just couldn't take that. So I just burst into tears and said, I wish Britain would come and just drop a big bomb on us, put us out of our misery. And they'd only been here 2 days then. But we had a Navy surveyor staying with us. He was on board the HMS Endurance.
Yep.
And he was left behind with us when the Endurance left for South Georgia. And of course, he had no passport, nothing. And of course, the Argentines, once they took over, we had Edict number 1, you shall. Edict number 2, you shall. And it was carry a passport or identification. If you went out, you had to carry a white flag or whatever. And it was all these edicts we had to put up with. If you used any communications, you were imprisoned for 2 years and things like that. So Steve had to give himself up. So that was a bit hairy that day when the Argentines flew in to arrest him. I think that was the first time we saw them, but they used to come in quite often then by helicopter, set up a machine gun post in the door of the helicopter, and then take my husband through our house and the gunpoint, searching for the enemy, as they called it.
I can't imagine what that must have been like. You know, was all this? I mean, obviously, the way that troops behave is a very difficult subject, especially as well as today, isn't it? So, there's more, issues around behaviour of troops occurring at the moment, isn't there? In in the Ukraine, as I'm sure you're aware.
Exactly.
When they were searching, how did you feel about that? Someone quite literally rifling through your house looking for who knows what?
It was quite frightening. But once my mum and Dad came out from Stanley, Dad sort of took over, and he sort of kept saying, stay calm, don't let them see you scared, just do as they're told. He used to say, we'll be fine. It won't be long until the British Bulldogs get here. We've got to wait for that day. Yeah, he made me feel like the boats were made of men and the men were made of steel. They would get here and that would be it. He used to always say that the British Bulldog are on their way, so just don't do anything silly, just keep going. But my nerves were at breaking point by the time the end came.
So it's really interesting, and I know we'll come on to this as well. You've supported a lot of veterans who've visited the islands, and even when you were in the UK quite recently. So it's very interesting to hear when you speak to lots of veterans who, in lots of cases, didn't even know where the Falklands were, but more importantly, weren't even sure, even once they'd been dispatched south, that he was actually going to come to a shooting match.
No, that's right. A lot thought or hoped that and when the Argentines heard they were on their way, they'd turn around and go again. But they didn't, unfortunately. And I think once they started the fighting by the Sheffield being sunk, I think that's when reality hit us of what really was happening. And you sort of had, from then on, you had to hold it together, because on the Falklands, there was only 1,800 to 2,000 of us. And if we lost one young person, to us, it was a tragedy here.
Yeah.
But to lose all those young men all the time, ship after ship, it really was a nightmare. Awful. But as soon as they landed and we knew that they were on their way through, Tyrrell's made sure our rover was filled up, and he said, as soon as I can, I'm off to help them, to get them out. So he carried He left at 4 o'clock with other locals one morning in the black dark so that the Argentines couldn't see them. We had no roads in those days, so it was all over boggy ground, and carried on from our farm to the next one to meet them as they were coming. And he stayed with 3 para and some of the Marines, and he was out the night with them when they took 2 sisters and Mount Longdon. He was left so far across Mount Kent so that the helicopters couldn't fly. They were there, the locals, to ferry the wounded back. But luckily, he said that the helicopters could fly. But they were there and watched it all, and the British guns were firing out over the top of them, and the Argentine guns were firing into them one side. So yes, he was away, and in fact, there was only my father left of the men in the house. All the rest was women and children. So we just stayed home and cooked sausage rolls and bread rolls. And if he ever came home for a couple of hours to have a sleep or a bath, he used to take food back for the soldiers. It wasn't a lot, but every little helped to have something fresh. Yeah.
Gosh. Did many of the islanders help out?
Yes, there was quite a lot of locals as soon as they were freed. At each farm that they went to, as soon as they were freed, they were all trying to help. And because they'd lost helicopters and things, the locals supplied tractors and trailers and Land Rovers. We didn't have a tractor on our farm. We only had a Land Rover. So, Terence used to just ferry Bergens and things, or just do as he was told, whatever they needed.
What point were you able to sort of come out the farmhouse? Because obviously I guess everybody was still sheltering whilst Terence, that's your husband, isn't it, was out helping with his friends and our fellow islanders.
On the farm where we were safe. Although that we got bombed one day by the Canberra bombers. The Argentine said they were bombing Mount Kent, but they weren't. They were bombing where our house was. They come down where we were living, Green Patch and Port Louis. The bombs came down, so that was a bit scary. But no, on the farm where we were, at the time there was no Argentines came in because it was just a bit too close to the British at that time. So they were sort of pushing them back into Stanley. So we were okay. The Archies only came in the one day. They were looking for some of their own people. Thought they were at the right place. But my dad just went to the other couple of houses and said to the people, if they ask where the young men are, just say that they're away bringing sheep in. We're on a farm, so they're away getting sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a new way of talking. Oh, they're away getting sheep.
Yes.
So when we spoke before, when you were in the UK, in Wales, you mentioned about sort of helping out with radio transmissions. Is that? Could you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, a friend and I decided that once we knew the British were getting close, that we would make a list of the places around us. We were here in the Falklands. The farms are one-man band farms, and they're quite spread out. So we made a list, and around us there was Johnson's Harbour, Port Louis, Long Island, Rincon Grande, places like that. And we just named them after some of the places in Britain, like Cardiff, Liverpool, and I got my husband to put our little antenna onto my broomstick and set up the CB radio again, because that was one thing, you see, we were threatened. If we would be imprisoned if we used our radios. So I just kept it in the house, and if the Argentines, we saw the helicopters going into any of the other farms, I just poke the broom out the window and speak to the locals at the stanchion where the 650 troops were. And we would just say that there was visitors at Liverpool, and they only have to look at the list and say, oh yes, the Argies went into Johnson's Harbour and things like that. It was just to help. And the day that the Canberra bombers bombed us, I just finished transmitting and sat down at the table to write to my brother in the UK to tell him that we were okay so far. And the bombs started coming down, and I thought that they'd heard me transmitting. And everyone was running to our air raid shelter, and I stayed in the house, disconnected our CB radio, and was saying, it's okay, it's me they're coming for. And after it was all over, we come back out of the air raid shelter we had made with bales of wool. I said, where is our 2-meter radio? And no one could find it. It was hours later. I'd put it in the deep freeze. I just have no recollection to this day why I put it in the deep freeze. But panic.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
So even the names you were giving for the like you said, Liverpool, Cardiff, they were even that was an act of defiance as well, wasn't it? I think sounds like it is to me.
Yes, it was. I had a few tellings off from my father for things that I was doing, but I think it was more nerves. I just felt that how can I say it? I do not like the word hate, but my hatred was getting so bad that it was affecting the nerves. And if I could do something against them, I would. My husband used to say, they're going to shoot you. And I say, I don't care. I hate them. I need them out. I can't live like this. And, I think that's what it was. It was defiance. They did one did threaten me one day because I had shouted at him and called him names, and he was looking through our coat pockets. Came into the house and started searching in our coat pockets. And I just said to him, and what do you think you're going to find in there? I said, do you honestly think I've got an Argie hidden in, do you think I've got a British soldier hidden in my pocket? I said, you stupid, and I won't say the rest. And he was just slamming his fist into his chest and shouting at me in Spanish. And when I looked up, my husband was standing behind him, sort of mouthing at me, stop it, stop it. But I think it was just my nerves. I was just wanting to defy them.
It sounded to me like you were a feisty young lady.
I was a very crabby young lady. With them. I needed to get them out. I just hated hearing that so many of our British servicemen getting killed through them. And that's what I can't forgive. Never will forgive. No. But one day I might, but I think it's getting too late now. When we came back from UK 2 weeks ago, there was 3 Argentine reporters on our plane that came from Argentina to Britain to come down here for the 2nd of April. And the woman asked us, were we Falkland Islanders? And I said yes. And she said she was an Argentine journalist. And how did I feel after 40 years? And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't think you'd like to hear what I feel after 40 years. And she said, please tell me. So I did. I said, I'll never, ever trust Argentines again for what you did to us in 1982. And then she put that on Facebook. that I was the only person on the plane that would speak to her, only Falkland Islander, and what I'd said. And someone in Britain had put good on that lady. So I said it to him and said it was me, but not thinking it's come up on Facebook, and she saw it and she started private messaging me. Yes, just 2 weeks ago. So after having a night's sleep, I sat down and told her that the war hadn't finished. They stopped all our contacts with Chile. We used to get a lot of our goods and freight from Chile. They've stopped all that. They've stopped humanitarian flights for us. They're just trying to strangle us. They only stopped a humanitarian flight a couple of weeks ago again. And I just laid it all down to her, and then I just said, and please sit down and think of what today Russia is doing to Ukraine. I said, and that's how we felt in 1982.
So
and then I never...
You said there that you would never forgive them, and I completely believe you, but I think also you did take the time to talk to her. You didn't have to do that, did you?
I didn't, but I just feel that I want to show them my hatred still of what they've done. That's what it is. It just still keeps coming out on me. I think that perhaps if I said that I myself personally feel so guilty of all the people that died for us.
Yeah.
That's what gets me, yeah.
I can understand that.
And I won't forgive them for what they've done.
I can understand that. So when we had a chat when you were in Wales, you were talking about the Royal Marines and how you'd had a bit of a fondness for them. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the Marines have been going to Falklands for years. I think 100 years or more. The Marines have been coming in, and yes, we had a good thing with the Marines. In fact, we had quite a few of them out with us on the farm when the Argentines raised that flag at South Georgia.
Right.
They were out there because that lot had been here for a year and they were going back home, and we knew some of them. So they came out to the farm and were having a farewell party with us. And with the helicopter crew of the Endurance that was there doing an aerial survey of what the surveyors had just finished out there. So yes, we were having a party with them. So we knew a few of them that were here on the 1st, 2nd, and then came back.
So
we watched that program the other night.
I was going to say, this is Naval Party 8901, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we knew some of those Marines, and in fact, two of them that I know that. Oh no, perhaps John wasn't, but I know one Marine that helped raise the flag was still here, living in the Falklands today.
Wow.
But there's quite a few of them of the Marine veterans that fought for us live here now. A lot of them. Yeah, we know them all.
So how did it feel when Stanley was liberated and the war came to an end?
We didn't know until on the 16th, not the 15th, because the surrender was I think like late afternoon, nighttime happened. So in the morning, I got up and I went and put the CB radio on, just as if I heard anything. And there was a local speaking to someone that was out on a farm. And I ran back up the stairs and said to Terence, because he came home then, I said, there's locals talking on our 2-meter set. He said, well, go back and ask them when they're finished what's happened. So I did, and the lady in Stanley said, it's all over last night. I said, oh my goodness, thank God for that. And we had a little chat, and then she said, "Oh, I've got a military policeman here. He would like to speak to you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Just want to ask you a question. What's the difference between a packet of fruit gums and an Argentine soldier?" I said, "I have no idea." He said, "The fruit gums lasted longer." So, we were relieved. We always said that we would celebrate when it was over, but we didn't. It was nothing really to celebrate. We lost too many people for celebrations. We just sat quietly that day. Everything, the airways, the skies were all just so calm. It was scary, really. Just wasn't a sound when you went outside. And you kept waiting. You kept thinking there's going to be a bang in a minute. And nothing happened.
So how long did it take you to readjust back to normality? Or
it took a long time. I would think that we were up to a year before we got
crikey.
cleaned up. The Stanley was just a terrible mess. It was just mud and ammunition and, I don't know, there was relics of vehicles that we lost. A few of the houses, one of our main stores we lost. They burnt them down. There was no water in Stanley. The electricity was gone. They asked people that, because a lot of people just went out of Stanley to get out of it, because, everyone knew that perhaps it would come to have to flatten the town if they didn't surrender. So they were asking people to stay out, don't come back until we try and clean up a bit. But just like they are now in Ukraine, they all want to go home. The people were going home, and the EOD were coming on the radio once they got that up and running and saying, when you go into your home, please be very careful. There's the Argentines have left upturned cups on top of saucers. Do not lift them. Call the EOD, because some have got hand grenades under and some have got human excrement.
Crikey.
So please don't touch them. And they had I know that they'd cut out, I think it was a Bible that someone had in their house. They cut a square out of the Bible and put a hand grenade in it. Luckily, the EOD were the first into that house and found it. So, wasn't supposed to be a drop of British blood shed, but I don't know what they thought. It was a terrible mess. They even put all the blackouts up in our post office and places with human excrement. They had to take the fire engines in and hose the walls and the windows down. They'd never used toilets. It was just all over the roads. It was all over people's garages. It wasn't just in one corner. They were opening drawers in offices and doing it in the drawers. We had a mess to clean up here. Very bad mess.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So
Go on. I've stopped having nightmares only in the last 2 or 3 years, until the day that the Russians invaded Ukraine, and I started again. But in the last few weeks, I've been fine again. Yeah, just brought it all back.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah. We were very lucky we're not having what they're getting now. But at the start, when they invaded, it was just like when they were saying the tanks were rolling in, and that's what we were listening to on the radio, on the farm.
So clearly you've got a lot of time and respect, and you're very thankful for those that came to liberate the islands, of course, some of those that didn't return. But you're still in contact with many, many veterans, aren't you? And I think you
Yes. I just keep in contact with as many veterans as I can. And we welcome them into our house. Even if we have a lodge built for them here called Liberty Lodge. And when I find out if there's any there, we try and go and see if they want to come up to our home. We bring them up for tea or a meal, or we go to a pub with them and buy them a drink, and we'll do anything to help them. Very much so. We'll be forever grateful for what they've done. I think until you go through a war, you don't appreciate your freedom. You honestly don't. Yeah. It was such a nightmare, and I just cannot thank them enough that we've got our home back.
So how do they react to your hospitality?
Well, we start off when we start cuddling one another and hugging, and we have a cry, some of us, and it's the way it goes because we were all in it together. That's the thing. So, I just feel if I can help by crying with them, or if we can just have a drink together and talk about it, or it helps them, it helps us. Talk to someone that knows what we went through. Yeah. That's the thing. And if we can help, we can. At the moment, a friend and I are we're crocheting scarves in the South Atlantic medal colours.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just making enough now, and we're going to lay them at every memorial in the Falklands, British Memorial.
Wow. And
this year for the 40th. I can go and get them just a minute. Trying to show you a scarf.
That is lovely. This is obviously a podcast, so people won't be able to see it, but I'm sure we can get a picture, can't we, Carol? You could send me, and then so we'll be able to show people. Maybe we could have a picture of you wearing one of your scarves that you've made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we just present them to our veterans. There's nothing, that's about all we can do to help or be there for them. And I'm hoping we'll have 2 veterans down for our landing day service on the 21st of May. But at the moment, we've been told that there's no indulgence flights yet for them. Because it's so expensive to fly here. We have to pay around about £1,600 return flight.
Crikey.
Which they can't afford. So I think that hopefully they'll give them back their indulgence flights. It stopped when the COVID outbreak.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get some back this year for the 40th.
How has the Falklands changed? Because when we spoke, you presented... Well, when you mentioned, obviously, there was about 1,500 islanders or so at the time, but it's become something quite... it's got like fishing industry and far more cosmopolitan was the impression you gave me, unless I've got that wrong.
Yes. Before the war, we had no income apart from wool, from farming. I think the government tried to have a fishing zone, but to be quite honest, I don't think the British government were interested in us. We were too small, so we didn't get anything. But after the war, that government was granted to have a fishing zone. And since then, the islands has boomed with the fishing and the wool and the tourism. And, we did have quite a lot of money in reserve. But at the moment, they're wanting to build us a new dock. We need new power. And there's quite a lot of stuff that we're doing. They're tarmacking roads now, which is, we always had in Stanley, tarmac, but not out to the main airport. what we've got. So they've nearly finished that. So we've got lots of houses now. A big difference in the Falklands. It's a nice place to be.
So you said you get a lot of tourists there, and I think, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
71.
71, and you're still working, aren't you? I think you said to me you work in tourist office. Is that right?
I'm a tourist. Yeah, I do. Yes, I work for the Falkland Tourist Board.
So tell me a little bit about that, Carol.
In the summer, usually from about the end of October, that's when the tourist ships come in. We have little ones from like 100 and odd tourists, which are the ones that go down to the Antarctic. They're people that like to go down to the Antarctic and see what's down there, as well as the Falklands. And then you get the big ones that take like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 passengers. Sometimes we'll end up with 2 of them in one day. So it's very, very hectic. But it's good. I like talking to the tourists. We had a farm for 30 odd years, and I thought, well, perhaps now I'd like to give up the animals and talk to people. By the end of some seasons, though, I think, at least the animals didn't answer back when we had problems. But I do enjoy it. But I am getting a bit old now for it. I might do another year or so and perhaps go part-time, but I just like going out and meeting people.
You described yourself as a chatterbox, and I think maybe that's the perfect job for you.
Yes, because I have to do surveys with the tourists, and I enjoy sitting down and talking with them. And they say, "Oh, we've always waited to see the Falklands. It's lovely to be here." And they always want to know, am I an Islander? And sometimes to get 13 or 16 surveys takes me about 2.5 hours time I talk to everyone. But, there's people that are genuinely interested in us, and I like talking to them from where they come from, their countries. Yeah, I enjoy it.
So in some ways, I guess the conflict made that happen, do you think? Is that or I just...
Yes, yes. There was the odd people used to come into the Falklands, but we weren't really known. We were just a little country, minding our own business, getting on with our own, until the Argentines decided it was theirs. So it was a big shock to the system. The people that went away was only people here that came in on contracts, or there was locals that were in higher jobs and things like that. There just wasn't the money here in the Falklands for everyone to go away and have a holiday. So until we got our fishing and tourism set up.
So do you think it's changed for the better?
Yes, it has. It's opened the Falklands up. We've been able to go and see some of the world now. And we have the military airport, so we feel safe. They're there all the time. I always say if they take the military away, I go with them, because I'd never stay here without the military presence. I appreciate all they've done for us, and all as well.
You were in Wales quite recently, and if I remember this right, you were staying with your daughter, was I right?
Daughter, yes, yep. Yes.
And you said to me that you'd discovered that there was a veteran in the village near where you were staying. What did you do?
I asked the farmer that told me there was one there to contact him again and try and get his phone number or something, because I really needed to speak to him and see him and say thank you, like we do with all the ones that come down, and to present him with one of our scarves that I was in the middle of making at the time. So I thought, well, I would like him to have it. So eventually, after being over in Northern Ireland with our other daughter, when I got back, I managed to get hold of Chris and we met up. And very emotional.
Mm.
He was with two powering goose green. So he tried to talk about that with us. And for once in my life, I held it together so that I could listen to him. You know, he was in a bad way. He had a metal plate put in his head and he'd been shot in the arm and things like that. So he was still very cut up, and he said more than anything that it was someone coming, like myself, my husband Terence, and our daughter Gillian. We all went and said thank you to him. And he just kept crying. Yeah. But I took him a set of Falkland 50p coins with our penguins on, and a pen and a book that we brought out on the 20th anniversary, dedicated to our British forces to say thank you. I'm trying to think. Oh, I gave him a snood with Falkland Islands on and his scarf. But yes, he was overjoyed to meet us, but he just couldn't get his head around that we were there to just say thank you so much. They always say we were there to do a job. I know they were here to do a job, but they've done a good job. They freed us.
Do you know, one of the questions I was going to ask you was, what would you like to say to those veterans? And I think that story that you've just told me really, really does sum up what you would like to say, unless there's anything else you wish to add.
No, it's just that we'll be forever grateful, and to thank them so much for what they've done. I think that perhaps a lot of them don't know that on our farm, that not Mount Kent farm, we bought another one in 89, a part of Teal Inlet. And we had 2 islands off the mainland, 2 small islands. And there was a family that lost their son on Longdon and wanted to have a piece of land, just say they owned something where their son died fighting for. And the Phillips family gave them the island, which was originally known as Little Rabbit Island. But now it's called Craig Island, after Craig Jones that got killed. So we keep in touch with the family all the time. And that was just some little thing to say thank you, even if it was just the one family, but they do own the island now. Yeah, right.
That's very generous of you, and I think that's such an admirable thing to do.
Well, it's the least we can do. Yeah,
Carol, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your time and taking the time to do this. I know it took a lot of arranging when you were in Northern Ireland, Wales, the Falkland Islands, and et cetera, but I can honestly say I've really, really enjoyed talking to you and meeting you. And if you ever come back to the UK, I'd love to meet you. And if ever I go to the Falklands, I am most definitely going to find you.
Okay.
Because you're a lovely, lovely lady. And I'd just like to say thank you so much for your time.
No, that's all right. Thank you.
Now, before Stephen might look back at the interview we've just heard, you may be interested to know that here at Company of Makers, we've got loads of online activities for veterans to get involved in. As well as this podcast, we've got online talks with inspiring guests, and we've got workshops where you can learn something new and meet like-minded people from the forces. To find out more, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send all the latest updates direct to your inbox. Just head over to companyofmakers.com/newsletter. Now back to Steve and Mike.
So I told you she'd get into her stride, didn't I?
Boy, what an interesting lady, and what a ordeal and experience she went through 40 years ago. And if I could summarise the whole of that discussion you just had, I would put it into 2 words. And those 2 words are forever grateful.
Yeah. I can't, as you know, I speak to all our guests before we do the recording session, and that she kept mentioning it time and time again. Eternally grateful.
I know. And I think, I hope lots of Falkland vets listen to this podcast, because I think she represents, the majority view of the islanders, about how grateful they are that the British Armed Forces came over to free them, and that 255 of them lost their lives in doing so. And she talked about feeling guilty about the people that lost their lives in order that they may be free. I mean, that's still with her 40 years on. It's extraordinary.
It is. And I've also, as you know, I've interviewed, talked to people and mentioned this conversation about how thankful she is and, how she feels about it. And people have really appreciated, I'm talking about people that were there, have really appreciated it.
Yeah. I thank you for arranging this, because I've spoken to lots of vets who were there, shipmates, muckers, people. And so I kind of know the veteran side of it quite well. But I had not really taken the perspective of what it must be like to be an islander, a Falkland Islander, at the time that on the 2nd of April 1982, thousands of Argentinian soldiers streamed ashore.
Yeah, and having your house searched at gunpoint.
Terrifying. She used the word terrifying and horrific, and I mean, on the day it happened, her niece spent the whole day under the table, completely terrified. And they ended up in their farmhouse on Mount Kent, housing up to 13 refugees. I use that word advisedly, from Stanley. And feeding sometimes up to 20 people a day, just because of the sheer terror that they were encountering during the short occupation.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I particularly agree with what you're saying about just not appreciating what it must have been like being, a resident of the Falkland Islands. In some ways, it didn't even occur to me, because it's not been that well covered, has it?
No, and she had 2 small children in tow as well. And I didn't know this, so there's a lot of things I learnt during that discussion. The Argentinian edict she talked about, the rules of conduct, like always carry an ID, carry a white flag. Really? Carry a white flag as a civilian? And there was, there were lots of other things, that they couldn't do, but it was clearly quite a authoritarian occupation, not just a occupation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's quite a change of lifestyle, if I can put it that way, isn't it?
It's a huge change in lifestyle. And actually, after they sort of, took stock of where they were and were less terrified, but still terrified. But I mean, actually, she talks about what they all did as their part, and I'd never really considered this. I mean, she talks about her husband going out to help the Marines and the Paras on Mount Longdon and the Two Sisters. And by help, it means bringing warm, hot food and, dry clothes, blankets and things like that. But these are all morale-boosting stuff. And I guess that would have directly affected the campaign in a very positive way. Morale of troops is really important in any war situation. You can see the difference between the morale of the Ukrainians and the morale of the Russian soldiers in what's happening today. But in 1982, boosting the British morale, which was quite high anyway, but boosting it with what the Falkland Islands did, had an impact on the fighting.
Absolutely. And I think this idea of a resistance movement and how they were using their CB radios and trying to provide intelligence to the British forces, it just hadn't even occurred to me at all that any of this would be going on.
Yeah, I did have, when I was listening to the recording, I did have this sort of hello sort of scenario playing out in my head. The Falkland Islander resistance, and this slogan, the British Bulldogs are on their way. The British Bulldogs are on their way. I've never heard of us referred to as the British Bulldogs from the Falkland Islands perspective, but I mean, the fact that we sailed a task force and we were coming, albeit that it took a bit of time to get there, that gave them hope. It gave them something to resist against and to fight for. And it was, extraordinary.
Absolutely. And I think, as you've just mentioned, the Ukraine, which is still obviously very topical as we record this, but also the impact on her of seeing all this on TV as well, and how it took her back to 1982. Again, you wouldn't necessarily think about the Falklands in that kind of context, but this is still about civilians being, shall we say, affected by the activities of armed forces.
Affected and affecting. There's no doubt that they played a part, and maybe I'm hoping this podcast will do some small way into recognising the efforts they did in helping us liberate the islands. That'd be good, wouldn't it?
That would be fantastic.
There were some disturbing things that she talked about as well, like the conduct of the Argentinian soldiers, and she talks about the recovery. It took a long time to clean up after the surrender, and it's not a, it's not a nice thing. But she talked about the amount of human excrement everywhere, everywhere, and just smeared everywhere as well. And it's revolting, but also nasty. And the fact they put hand grenades into cut up Bibles or under upturned cups and saucers, just to give, even though they surrendered, they were still prepared to cause death and destruction. That really quite disturbed me, actually.
Yeah, and also, I guess, the impact that has, in later life as well, because it's obviously difficult to forgive, isn't it, when things like that have happened? Well,
she does say she doesn't think she can forgive them. She's still angry about it, 40 years on. She said the nightmares only stopped a couple of years ago, and then they got sort of reignited briefly again when Russia invaded Ukraine, as a reminder of, one sovereign nation invading another. So, 2 years ago so for 38 years, she was still having nightmares about it. And she's not alone. That must have been quite common, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that many that were involved in the war would be still fully aware of it and dreaming about it. I guess that's one of the fallouts of conflict, isn't it?
Yeah. I loved the Welsh story that she told, the story in Wales that she told towards the end of your chat, and what it meant to the paratrooper veteran that she caught up with, and how emotional he was all this time on, and how he was still carrying the consequences of that war 40 years ago, and how emotional they all were, even though they didn't know each other. So there's no doubt that what happened 40 years ago still carries a huge impact on the Falkland Islanders themselves. And I think she summed it up very nicely when he tried to play it off by saying, in a very sort of typical British way, we were just doing our job. And she said, well, you've done a good job. You freed us. And I thought that was a lovely sentence.
It is. I think, given half the chance, Mike, I'm sure she'd look after every single person that went down there.
Yeah, well, everyone listening to that, you know where to find her. And there was a lovely story right at the very end about one of the little islands called Little Rabbit was renamed after one of the fallen sons by the people that owned it. And I thought that was very touching.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was actually, it was quite an emotional experience talking to her, because it was a set of insights I certainly didn't have. And if you want to know where she is, of course, you just leave Gibraltar and turn left, I think, is your directions.
Yeah, turn left, not right. That may come up in a number of your discussions. We turn left, not right. I think the message here for any veterans listening to this, and actually the British people as a whole, is that the Falkland Islands are still, 40 years on, eternally grateful for what happened and the sacrifices that we all made, not just the 255 that never came back, but all of those still living with quite, severe PTSD or other, burdens that they carry as a result of what happened and what they saw. And we'll touch on more of those, I guess, during all of our discussions in this series. And then the message to the Falkland Islanders is, you guys rock. I had no idea, what the perspective must have been like for you. Or rather, I hadn't thought it through. And what Carol has done has made me and you, Steve, and anyone listening to this, understand a little bit better what it must have been like to be occupied and the ordeal that you went through, and actually the courage you guys showed in trying to help the British Marines and soldiers reclaim what was yours. So big shout out to the Falkland Islanders as well.
I couldn't agree more. She's achieved something quite major there, Mike. We're agreeing.
I think we agree on most things. It's just we don't cover that.
It doesn't make for a good podcast, does it?
No. I mean, Carol, you're a superstar.
I can't add anything to that, and I completely agree. Thank you very much, Mike.
You're welcome. Hi, it's Mike here again. So just to let you know, this podcast accompanies the stunning Falklands 40th commemorative book produced by theveteran.uk on behalf of the South Atlantic Medal Association, SAMA 82. And we'd like to say a really big thank you to both our funders for making this possible, namely theveteran.uk and SAMA. And if you'd like to buy a copy of the book, then please head to either the veteran.uk website or sama82.org.uk. Thanks for listening.
Before we finish, we'd love to hear from you. So if you've got any thoughts, suggestions, or even a bit of banter, just email us at podcast@companyofmakers.com. You never know, you might even get a mention. And don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you. This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Mike Davis Marks, and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.